Welcome back, everybody. My name is Gammatrap, one word, and today we are covering wood. There are several videos already planned for this entire wood series, so be sure to subscribe and click the bell if you'd like to be notified when each video drops. But without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so to start our wood series, as per usual, I like to make a little texture tutorial where we go over, the basic fundamentals of how the surface of a material looks and how it sort of behaves and how the colors all work. And also, per usual, we're going to do this in kind of a square shape, square rectangular kind of shape, because that just makes things easier when you're dealing with like how light works on flat planes. It just makes things simpler for, I think, everyone in general. So to start, we're going to make that shape, and it's not going to be a perfect little square. We are going to make a square-like shape, if you can't hear the quotations in my hands right now. We're going to get a lasso tool, but the polygonal lasso tool. If you don't see this, you just click and hold and grab the polygonal lasso tool. And that allows us to make intricate little shapes with flat lines instead of having to hand draw our selection. But we're going to make that shape. And not like a perfect, square. We're going to make that shape in a slightly imperfect square. So a little askew, kind of leaning one way and the other. Not quite perfect, and because that sort of falls in line with the whole stylized stuff. And now we're also going to just grab one of our colors here, which I'm going to get into in a second, or our middle colors. I'm just going to paint that in, just so now we have a shape. So let's get into these colors real quick. The way wood seems to work in the real world, it has several different colors, from gray to red to black to white, to just this whole spectrum of wood. So the type of wood or trees you've got in your environment is going to be, it's going to be what tells you what kind of color, obviously, that you're going to be using here. And it's cool to use strange colors like green. Well, green's not really strange. Green's everywhere. Purple, if you want to be like in a crazy fantasy setting. But for most trees, our lightest colors are going to be more on the yellow side. So you'll look up here to this sliding spectrum right here. I'm going to just go down, and you're going to notice that this goes from yellow to red, or yellow orangish to slightly redder orange as it gets darker. And this is just the standard typical like tree or wood style colors. So watch, see, here's a little circle. Keep your eye on that and keep your eye on this. So we're going to go from lightest to darkest, not counting the colors on the sides here. And usually when it comes to light to dark, with my stylized pieces to make them nice and vibrant, I also tend to make my color here in sort of a diagonal fashion. So the lighter stuff gets lower saturation, so more left, and the darker stuff I try to get a little more saturation of color, so it's over here on the right. So watch this diagonal line here. Not perfectly a diagonal, but it's got that general gist. We're going to start with something like it's closer to butter yellow than full-on tan. I don't really know how to best describe it. You have to eyeball it or pick up some references, or just screenshot these colors and just grab them if you want. And our darkest color is going to be sort of like this very deep burnt orange with it's like very deep brown, but a lot of red in that brown. It's very red brown. Now with our colors out of the way, what we're going to do is, now we have our shape here, let's just put in some basic lighting. So we have our shape layer right here. Let's make a new layer, right click that layer and hit clipping mask. And this makes it so, as usual, everything we draw gets stuck to that layer. So this is our new layer. It's got an arrow pointing down. It's clipped to this layer. So if we draw on this layer, everything we draw stays inside the shape that it's clipped to. We're going to get our lasso tool again. We're going to find the corner. We're going to make the shadow area first. Now the way you do this is you find the bottom corner and you line it up roughly to the top. You drag that back down. Because it's a clipping mask, we can just kind of overlap with these. So we're going to grab a shadow color. And the two brushes we're going to be using are the two most basic brushes you can find. We got the hard round pressure opacity and the soft round pressure opacity. The hard brush is going to be really, really useful for wood. You'll come to find out pretty soon, because it leaves hard lines, which is pretty nice when you're dealing with things like bark or wood planks. Now we're going to do the same thing for this other side. We need to make this one a little darker than what it is right now, because right now it's a little too light. Just going to pick one of our darker colors, put it on there. And then our top layer, we're going to make this actually a little lighter. So probably that. Yeah, it's pretty good. So now we have our basic shape with our basic color layout. Now we're going to grab our shape layer right here by selecting it, and we're going to mask it by hitting this mask button right here. Now we got white and black, and we have our mask selected. White reveals, black conceals. So we're going to get black, and with our hard round brush, if we paint black on here, it's like an eraser, but if we switch our colors and paint with white, it comes back, and that's the whole point of the mask. So let's make this not so perfect. We like it to be nice and, you know, good, but let's just mess up these nice perfect little lines just by a little bit. Maybe nothing like crazy, but you know, enough. We're trying to make wood here, you know, and over time, wood tends to bend and warp and distort. We're gonna move a little fast, just kind of touching just pretty much all those little edges right there. We don't like perfect little lines when we're drawing natural stuff. Even stone cut, for example, in one of our previous tutorials, we also wanted to kind of mess those up a little too, because stone can be worn down. And we're gonna turn on our pressure here. Technically speaking, it's shape dynamics. So you'll notice it goes from sharp to thick, depending on how hard you press. We're gonna come down to our little grass thing, and this is just me because I have a little grass pedestal. Obviously, if you don't have a grass pedestal, you can skip this step, but for completion's sake, it's very rare that I'm assuming you'll find that your wood will be on a perfect little flat plane. It might if it's inside or something, but if we do this mask right now, it saves us a ton of time having to do it later. And right now, it doesn't look like there's much. And actually, erase is a little too much, too uniform. And right now, there's no like grass and stuff painted underneath it, because you'll notice like some of this area is in dirt, but I'll paint that over later. I always do a little extra credit. Okay, pretty good. Let's turn that off. So now it's back to no pressure difference, no size, no shape dynamics. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna handle the actual texture of the wood. And it's great because we already have our lighting colors, our planes already kind of roughly figured out. But now let's get into how wood kind of looks. Wood has a very interesting property. I wanna make a new layer, make another clipping mask so it's clipped down to our shape layer, so that when we paint things, we're not gonna be messing stuff up. And I'll just explain this while we go on. Wood has a very interesting property where it's almost like fingerprints. So let's make this wood sort of bend. So say this wood had been chopped up. I'm gonna grab some of the dark spots and drag them into the light. I'm gonna make them come at an angle, because when you cut wood and you look at it, it looks pretty, you know, it's got its little weird lines and grooves. And like I said, almost like fingerprints. I don't know if you've seen any of our other tutorials, but the way I'm picking these colors is, if I'm going to add a shadow in this light area, I'm going to grab one step down from its color. So right now I've got these three colors. I've got the light, the middle, and the dark. So if I'm going to put a shadow in the light, I'm going to grab one step down to make that shadow. But if there's going to be a shadow on the middle, I'm going to go one step down and grab the color from the dark. And this is how we handle our steps. And don't make them uniform, meaning don't make them predictable. You want to make sure that these are all they don't quite look like okay, there's one. Don't make them evenly placed. Don't make them all look the same. There's 3 rules to stylized work, and that is shapes within shapes, don't be boring, and the rule of cool. Shapes within shapes means if I do that, instead of just this straight line, now there's a little shape, there's a little curve, a little circle thing in there. And that just makes things interesting. The rule of cool means it doesn't necessarily have to make sense as long as it looks cool. But if it doesn't look cool and it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't work. And don't be boring means don't make just ordinary things. You know, don't make things predictable. If it's predictable, it's boring. Now, because there needs to be a shadow here, I'm going to grab the dark, I'm going to put its little groove there. And now the light is going to be coming from the top left. I made this little extra layer here. If you want to learn how to do these God rays and stuff, there's another tutorial that you can go check out. It's how to color with gradient maps and adjustment layers. But I made this to illustrate where the light source is coming from. So with that in mind, we're going to take our light and drag it down the opposite edge of where the light source is coming to make that groove pop. Because the light is hitting the other side of that groove. And I explain this with every single one of my texture videos, but this just because, you know, this one's no different. So here's a groove, for example. This part, let's say if the light's coming from up here, coming down. This part is in shadow. And this part, the opposite side from the light source. So this side's the closest to the light source and this side's the farthest away. The one that's farthest away gets hit by the light because it's coming down here like this, and it's casting this shadow because the light's not touching this side, but it's gonna hit this one full on. Now I have to explain that with every single one of my texture videos, but it's for a good reason. And don't forget, the shadow and the light both do the stepping process. So because this is 2 steps away from the lightest one, to make a highlight, we're going to grab 1 step up. And this is just our first initial grooves. Now, interestingly enough, the whole point of stylized work is to try and make the most simple iteration possible while making it interesting, exaggerated, stretched a little bit. So let's find the most simple possible shapes and then work from there. So let's use these grooves that we put in. Now these grooves are actually running the risk of very quickly being boring. So let's actually change this up a little bit more. All right, now let's find those shapes. So to do that, I'm just gonna draw a couple lines with my hard brush here. And like I said, the benefit of having a hard brush is it leaves those hard lines. I'm gonna do this on both sides. So because this groove is about that wide, I'm gonna take this brush and we bring it down actually. I'll make the brush that big for that one, a little smaller. There we go. And now we're gonna start giving the block of wood its grooves. So let's cut in where these grooves are. Now, the way the grooves work on wood, like I mentioned before, like fingerprints, that's actually really, really close to how it truly is. Now, each of these grooves, again, should probably be different sizes, different widths, different, levels of depth. Each of these cracks need to be a little darker, a little lighter. You kind of vary them because otherwise you do run the risk of being boring, which we definitely do not want to do. And grab a light layer, and on the top area here, I'm gonna start making the brush about the same size as the plank, you could say, and moving down a bit. And we're not gonna make these all the same like levels of brightness, right? We're gonna vary the pressure of our brush because we do not want this to look boring. If they're all the same, it's boring. We're fighting against that with every single thing we do is gonna be a fight against boring. It's the last thing we want. And let yourself be surprised. So right now, I'm finding that I kind of like this extra groove kind of thing here. So I'm probably going to make another little spot like that, which matches up this other line here pretty well, actually. Okay, now onto the fingerprints kind of thing. And this goes hand in hand with the shapes and shapes rule. Right now, we're going to cut a couple random light little swirls, kind of like this. But only every so often, every 1 or 2, and they can swirl around each other. And don't make them, the same, and vary how far away they are from each other. And try not to do more than one. Just make it one little group, And change the size of the brush. And then we're going to just do a little bit of those from the edges up. Very thin, very, very small. And again, the don't be boring rule. Don't be predictable. Don't make these lines the same across. We want these to change in length, width, height, and all that. And the thickest ones are going to be the grooves. And then we also do that from the top down because that's an edge. And we're going to do that very lightly because this is the light spot. And it's okay to leave like areas where there's none of these little lines here. And if you're noticing that they're starting to look too similar, change it up, you know? Add a really long one. Add a really thick one. Don't add any at all. It's up to you. Because this is completely based on how you like to, you know, make these stylized pieces. And you're going to experiment. And you're going to find the best ways for you. Now we're going to work on the top. So we're going to grab our color down here. We're actually going to darken up a bit on the top. Around the middle area. Right around here. But remember, this is going to be the lightest side. And it's going to slowly get darker. Closer this way because the light's coming from over here. So remember how we changed the brush size for these planks? We're going to do the same thing from the top. Now, try to avoid going straight to the edge. We want a little bit of that lighting to hit the edge on all sides. We're just going to darken up the middle a bit. And we can fix all this stuff up a little later. But the edge here, we kind of like that light because in a lot of stylized pieces, we have what I like to call the ridiculous edge. It doesn't make sense, but it falls well into the rule of cool. So everyone kind of tolerates it pretty well. And what that is for some reason, the edge closest to the viewer tends to get a lot of lighting. It's just, I don't know why, but like I'm showing you right now, by the way. But here's the edge closest to us, this edge right here. And this edge, you know, the edges get a little extra love that I don't think they necessarily deserve, but it does look cool, so I can't really complain. Rule of cool taken to full effect. Now, on the edge situation, remember back the grooves, how we had that? Well, the same works sideways. If the light source is over here, the edge of the groove that is closest to the light source is darkest, and the edge of the groove that is farthest from the light source is the most well lit. So we're going to grab our light right there, and we're going to gently put it on the edge of our grooves. And vary, you know, keep it different. The whole don't be boring thing works everywhere in this stuff. And the ones, again, closest to our light source area right here get the brightest. Okay, so far so good, so far so good. Now, remember how we did these little lines, these quote-unquote fingerprints? We're going to do the same thing to the top. And we're going to make them communicate because they're all attached. So let's clean up this edge real quick. Now, you know how we made the brush the same size as the planks when we're drawing down? The same thing works for the grooves. So you make your brush as big as the groove is when you're painting on it. You could paint the entire groove. You can also clean up the sides of the groove. Do the edge a bit better than that. And now real quick, before we forget, let's go down to our shape layer here, the main layer that's in charge. We're going to grab that mask and we're going to cut in these grooves that we put in. So wherever there's a groove, you add a little notch. You can experiment how you like your notches. This is specifically to really show that they exist. If you got a groove, but you don't get notches, it doesn't really look like they're actually there. It just looks like they've been kind of painted on. We're doing the full service wood situation. Okay, back to our layer with the clipping mask. We're gonna make these fingerprints communicate. So wherever you see a line coming up here, You're going to make that line travel to the top. You know, pay attention to where, you know, the direction of these things are. So, for example, the direction of the wood material goes up like this, but then it stops at the corner and then it changes course. Technically be more like that. You have to experiment to find the best direction for you, and it's really hard to go into too much detail about like perspective, but this is a perspective issue. If you're having trouble, find some good perspective guides and work with those, which I would suggest you do. This is not quite a perspective tutorial, but we do use perspective a lot in this. But don't let that be a deterrent. So we go up here to this edge of the groove, and then we follow the groove out. And it's gonna be light because it's up here in the lightest area. And the whole don't be boring thing, don't make these grooves the same distance away from the edge. You can actually ignore some and just make little nubs. Now, when you see me do this, when you see a little eyedropper tool, it means I'm holding down Alt or Option on a Mac. When you do that, it gives you this eyedropper tool so you can just pick whichever color you want to paint with. So you pick that yellow, you're painting with yellow. You pick that, you know, dark brown, you're painting with that. So if you see me do this, it means I'm just color picking. It just saves you time from having to like go up to swatches or whatever. If you just make little dabs of the color here, you can just grab that, paint with it, grab that one, paint with it, grab one of the colors that's already on the canvas, and you can just paint with that. So moving right along, we don't want to waste too much time, but wood is a little weird, so. Now we're going to add different levels of depth. So we're going to make some of these planks, or some sections of these planks, look a little more shallow or tilted or facing the other way than the other ones. But first, I'm going to kind of flatten this out a bit because these grooves are a little too boring for my taste. So I got my brush nice and big, and I'm doing the thing that a lot of beginners are really afraid of. I'm ruining the work. But it's on purpose, so we're good. Alright, so I'm gonna grab a darker color, and I'm just gonna put in like our fingerprints, but much thicker. And just a couple. This really varies the planes. That if you're running the risk of being boring, just throw in some of these. I'm starting to see this section is just one giant plank. So I'm gonna make the brush the exact same size as that and start kind of brushing up and down on it kind of gently. Probably more gently than that. Because I still want the underlying detail to sort of bleed through. But now that's almost its own little plank. Kind of like it. I'm gonna give it a groove. Now often when wood splits and chips, it's not just a perfect little crack. You know, it's not one little line. Typically speaking, it has friends, so it'll have like a big split in the wood right there, but then like a couple others that kind of split off of it. And now, rule of cool, we're going to take the edge here and give this a bit of rim lighting, because right now the background of this wood piece is dark. So to help these values stand out against each other, I make a little rim lighting on the edge. Not suggested for every piece, by the way. It can make a piece look pretty flat, but when it's a stylized piece like this, I'm not really too worried. I'm willing to take that risk. Okay, so we're just gonna do a little bit of extra credit, quick little time lapse, and we're gonna go over what we learned. See you in a second. All right, so there we go. Little extra credit. You all know me. I just added some extra grass and sort of made the piece of wood look like it's actually sitting on the pedestal with a shadow and stuff. Made it communicate with our light source a bit more. Made everything kind of fit together. Just a nice little bit. You know me, just like to make things nice and neat. And now that we got the wood texture out of the way, then we can start working on some really cool stuff. Like the next one is going to be a wooden stump, and it's going to be a lot like this, like a tree stump. Like the tree's just been cut off, but the real difference is we're going to have bark to deal with, and it's going to have roots kind of going off into the ground a bit, but that's pretty much it. It's going to be really close to this, but thankfully we like to take these tutorials in little steps. So I'm going to skip ahead a lot of the stuff that we talked about in this texture tutorial. So it's pretty important that you saw this. Congratulations for sticking around this far. Leave a like if you liked it, a dislike if you disliked it, sub to see more. Thank you so much to my amazing patrons. I appreciate the ever-loving out of you for supporting the ever-loving out of me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.